you. As I said, Will Power IBEW 77. Just everybody knows I'm a journeyman lineman, about 25 years in the trade. I represent 6 small utilities, the labor at 6 small utilities, and all of the construction linemen, line workers east of the Columbia River, North Idaho. So my presentation today is talking about the labor issues with transmission. There are some key barriers that we currently face to transmission upgrades. A little background, there's about 125,000 what we call line workers, linemen, women in the country, union and non-union total, which is not really a lot. So currently we're experiencing a labor shortage nationwide in this trade. And this is due to retirement of baby boomers and lack of large-scale investment in infrastructure historically in the energy sector. There's large investment in the 40s and the 70s, and then our opinion is basically everybody's kind of been flat. You know, if you need a project built, it gets built for need, but not a large collaborative effort nationwide to plan for the future. And that has led to this labor shortage we have now. It takes about 7,000 hours of on-the-job training, in addition to classroom and controlled environment training, or basically 3.5 to 4 years to complete apprenticeships for journeyman linemen. Approximately 100 years ago, the fatality rate of line workers was 50%. 50% of the at that time, men only went into the trade to do the work. 50% survived, as 50% died on the job. We've worked very diligently at the IBEW since that time to get that fatality rate down. Currently, line workers are in the top 10 most dangerous jobs in the world by the Department of Labor statistics. And that is even with all our safety and all our training. We run into some problems with if we loosen the standards of the apprenticeships, try to fast track the training to create more line workers sooner. We know that what that road goes down, and that's more fatalities and more incidents and lost time accidents, damaged equipment, hold up of projects. It gets besides the human effect, there is also a huge financial effect every time we have a fatality, a large, or it stops these projects. We had one last year in Central Washington where a young apprentice was killed. The job was frozen by the state for over a month or more while they did their investigation. So it holds everything up as well, which costs even more money. Yeah, along with that, the shifting off of natural gas that's coming, as well as the utilization of electric vehicles, creating the extra, the high demand, putting all your eggs in one basket with electricity. It's a good way to reduce our carbon footprint, but it's going to, besides the transmission work that needs to be done that we're discussing, this is going to have a effect of, rebuilding distribution and distribution overhead and underground structures and lines, as well as transformers and other equipment to every residence that is currently on natural gas or adds an electric vehicle. So you're not just doing the transmission, you're going to have to rebuild basically the whole grid from point of generation to the meter for the demand, which then it's the same men and women that are building the transmission lines that are doing the distribution lines. So you're further depleting that labor pool. Some of the fixes to this issue. I mean, we can ramp up to do this work, but some key items that would help is accelerating some of the projects or starting them sooner than later to create the work that we need to train the apprentices, because we can't train them if we don't have the work. You can't, we have controlled environment stuff. The Northwest, we have down in Astoria, Oregon, our JTC apprenticeship training center that we share with 3 other locals for the region. And we have facilities there, but that's just not the same as doing the work out in the field. And the work's so varied that you just can't simulate every situation out there. So they also kind of starting some projects sooner than later. Will labor costs are going up with the demand of labor. The rates are going up for the line workers, and so getting some of the work done sooner will actually help, mitigate that inflation of labor cost, make the projects a little bit cheaper to get done. Another thing that I keyed on yesterday was the environmental concerns. If we identify environmental concerns and plan on the mitigation efforts early, we'll create a safer work environment for these line workers. That way they don't need to deviate from their planned work to adapt and overcome the situations on the ground. Once things happen on the fly without the planning stages, we usually have serious injuries or fatalities. There's an instance in California a couple of years ago. They're heavily into environmental issues down there, and some choices were made, and the company ended up folding over a 250-foot tower with people on it, having fatalities and stuff. So, and that was directly related to workarounds of what they would normally do due to environmental factors. So in the end, they ended up doing it the way they would have done first. But just some planning in that area really helps to streamline everything. So that's about what I have. I'm open for any questions.
Great. Will, thank you. And so please go ahead and hit Alt-Y if you have questions. And then I'd also invite folks to kind of reflect in the same vein that we did yesterday about challenges and opportunities, because clearly, the things that Will laid out there pose potential significant barrier to the work that we're potentially envisioning over the course of the next several 20, 30 years. Great. Nicholas.
Thank you. Will, I really appreciate your comments. I'm curious, does a journeyman lineman have to have a special certificate or special training to work on high tension wires versus distribution system wires? And are there any if that's true, I don't know, but if it is true, are there specialties that have acute labor shortages?
No, we say 9-volt to lightning bolt. Once you obtain a journeyman lineman ticket, as we call it, you do everything from point of generation to the meter. There's that, they do it all. So, I mean, we have other classifications, equipment operators, groundmen, laborers, and such like that. But the linemen do it all, substations, everything. So.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Will. Other questions or reflections on what Will shared with us all this morning?
And I could add that I was at a labor management in Portland 2 days ago, and the JATC started about 180 apprentices this year, which is a historic high for that organization. And I believe we have 322 apprentices in the Northwest. That's Washington, North Idaho, and Oregon going right now as well. So that's historic because we have more work, but and I would add, there has been some infrastructure, investment, but it's just as needed basis. If the area you need more power or down your street, added some houses, they would rebuild the line, reconductor the line, and then, affect any transmission net for the area. But they just, they've historically built for the peaks, like we just like transmission, you build for the peak load that you have, you try to project a little bit, build it as big as you need for the next, 20 years or so, but with growth, how it is these days. and the demand, that's a big thing, is the demand that no one saw coming with the electric vehicles and the switching off natural gas, because we have it has been incentivized in the state for 40 plus years to be on natural gas. It's pretty efficient, and switching off of that source of energy is what's causing this. So
Great, thank you, Will. So we got several questions or comments here. I've got Kathleen, Joe, Bernard, then Glenn. So Kathleen, please.
Thanks, Will. One of the topics that you covered that is really.
Oops. Kathleen, you accidentally muted yourself. There we go.
Okay, the troubles continue. We'll see if I can keep it going here. So truly your comments about the importance of environmental considerations and the impact changes during the construction project may make on potential safety to line workers. What recommendations do you have, or do you want to think about it in terms of how we can incorporate information in our planning processes to try to not be in that position?
Well, just off the cuff, this work is, it's vehicles getting to work sites and traveling along the corridors to construct or reconstruct things. And usually it involves excavation. Sometimes there's temporary excavation when you back up when you're pulling up lines and stuff, because the structures might not be where the line is going to end necessarily. It'll be spliced. So it's usually that's what we run into, is excavation on those sites, and access issues. Usually that causes us the biggest problems.
And do you think, just as a follow-up, is some of that by trying to meet schedules and therefore going faster, or trying to go faster?
On the environmental thing that I'm speaking to, it's not really going faster. I mean, unless the planning portion was rushed, possibly.
Okay.
Like the California incident, there was a type of animal that lived in the ground, burrows or what, and they did not want to excavate to disturb those. So the temporary anchoring system that they would put in place to pull the wire was not used. They went with a different method, and that's what caused everything to be pulled over. Miscalculation, and from what they normally did, trying to figure it out. That's what linemen do all day. Is it's a changing world out there, and everything's not the same. But you deviate too far, and then you have accidents. So,
thank you.
Thank you, Will. Thank you, Kathleen. I've got Joe, Bernard, then Glenn. Joe, please.
Yeah, thanks, Will. I had a question about whether or not did we run into shortages, labor shortages in the Northwest during recent windstorms and such?
we have it's when that takes. There's some other issues in there too, but we are right now. For instance, just regular work. Local 77, so the whole state has what we call standing calls, where calls that are not able to fill. Because we refer in construction side, at least not at the utility side direct hire, but we refer out guys as they travel around the construction line. You might go do a job in Texas if you wanted to go. You can go anywhere in the country, and which is very helpful as bigger projects are needed, where you can move the workforce to, or draw the workforce to where the demand is. But the demand is everywhere right now in this country, and we have 37 standing calls for journeyman linemen, which that's a big amount for line workers, as limited as we are. So that leads to longer outages during storms. It gets fixed, but it just takes longer, to get done. So.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Will. Bernard, and then you, Glenn. Bernard.
Thanks, and thanks a lot, Will, for your presentation. That's really enlightening. I think from this side of the ball, we tend to plan and not think about boots on the ground and actually thinking about the labor force and how much there is of it. And if I got this right, my back of the napkin math here, 7,000 hours for a journeyman is about 5 years to reach a certification for a journeyman. Is that right?
It's about 4.
4 years, 4K. So 4 years, and then there's 37 calls for linemen now, or journeyman linemen now, and you guys don't have the bodies to fill those roles currently.
That's correct. And we're in the construction side, the utilities are having a shortage. So what they do is if they don't train their own apprentices, or, somebody leaves and that planning wise over the years for the apprentice journeyman leaves and go to another utility or somewhere, they rob from construction traditionally, guys either working on, either they just straight apply there, or you're working on someone's property, like a PSC property or a Vista or wherever. And then, they say, hey, this guy does a really great job. You want to, they put out the posting, and the construction guy might be getting older and settling down. So we're having we have a ton of guys settling down at the utilities right now too. So, which is great for them, but for your big projects, it's not so great.
Right. And if I could just ask one last follow-on question. So kind of looking into your crystal ball, if you would, in what we're planning, or this transmission grid corridor project looks like 20 or 30 years down the line, 5 years for journeyman apprentice, assuming we have enough in the hopper going through the program now. Do you think that we would have enough labor force in 20 or 30 years to complete this project?
Without a ramping up, no.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bernard. Thank you, Will. I got Glenn, Julie, then Clint. Glenn, please.
Thanks, Will. Well, thanks, Rob, and then also thank you, Will, for that presentation. And I think you talked about this a little bit already, but is the labor pool kind of the same between the projects, like constructing commercial buildings and doing retrofits in the residential sector compared to this kind of more utility type work? Or are those kind of separate job areas?
Are you at, we're not part of the building trades. I don't know if that's what you're asking. That work is so different. It's so, not even close to,
Yeah, I think that is
Yeah.
what I was asking, is
Yeah.
whether, like the electrician who, they do seem to be in short supply for like installing the circuits for electric vehicles, or even, new electric heat pumps in a house that's been using natural gas for heat. And then just the overall, commercial construction activity and the electrical work that's associated with all the new commercial buildings. You're saying that's a pretty different pool of workers compared to the utility work that you presented on today?
yes, yeah, totally. The inside wiremen, they have, I think, about an 8,000 hour apprenticeship, but what they call high voltage, we call low voltage. We have low, medium, high, extra high voltage, and so while they get into 480, and that's very dangerous voltage, that's about it for them. So
Yeah.
And the type of work is so different. So
Okay, great, thank you.
yep.
Thank you, Glenn. Thank you, Will. Julie, and then Clint. Julie, please.
Okay, so Will, you were talking about the journeyman lineman being able to go, pretty much anywhere around the country to work, but aren't there different work roles between the states? Like, is there some variation in that training, like for Pacific Northwest linemen versus, say, down in the South, that would cause some limitations, or is that easily overcome?
It's pretty easily overcome. The only, everybody has Fed OSHA. Some states don't have Fed OSHA, or they have Fed OSHA, but they don't have anything else. In Washington State, we have the WAC. We're very protective of the WAC. It's helped us have one of the safest work records around the country since its inception. So people that don't know, the WAC came before Fed OSHA. They based it on the WAC basically. We do what it won't affect transmission. We do hot stick, what we call hot stick. We use fiberglass sticks to manipulate the energized conductors when you change out poles and stuff. There's a big misconception that we turn the power off every time we work on it, and it's more the opposite, to keep the lights on. Because if we turned it off every time a pole need to replace or reconductors or anything, your lights would never be on. So they do what we call rubber gloving in most of the rest of the country, but there's limitations to that. If you climb a pole and work off the pole, certain voltages, you can't do that. There's a lot of limitations to that, and we see it as less. When an accident happens, it's worse when you're rubber gloving than hot sticking, but that won't affect the transmission per se, because you only hot stick or you do de-energize the transmission work at the voltages we're talking about. So,
Okay, thank you.
Great. Thank you, Julie. Clint, please.
I was just going to reiterate with what Will was saying about the difficulty with line workers finding them. Give you some numbers for a utility. We're a small utility. We have 18 line workers and 2 apprentices and 3 vacancies right now. So that's 16% vacancy in line worker. And to Glenn's comment on, while this may not be an answer to the rest of the building trades, the city also has electricians, electronic techs, radio techs, and other skilled force. And we do not have any vacancies in those trade areas. And so we're fortunate on that. Definitely a difficulty with small numbers of line workers availability right now. And yes, we'll continue growing our own, and so that we don't steal from the construction trade. I know we'll have another apprentice position open this next year, and I'm glad to say the city's has had an apprentice program approved through the state since 1958, and so it's a long-going apprentice program, and we're proud of that. So concur with Will's comments on lack of line workers right now. Thank you.
Clint, thank you. Stu, please.
Yeah, a quick question, Will. You were asked, are we going to have the workers we need in the future there? And it was no, unless we ramp up, which is also kind of yes, as long as we ramp up, right? But can you say a little more? Because I think you've got those 300 some folks who are going through the apprenticeship that the union's doing, but it sounds like that there are other ramps too. There's lots of different ways that apprentices come in. Can you sort of lay out the groundwork of all the pieces that could get ramped up that could make sure we have the people we need?
Well, each region has their own training, and it's all standardized through the IBEW. It's standardized with the same bookwork throughout the country. The on-the-job training varies, and how they do that. We do Saturday class every other Saturday during the apprenticeship process for 7 or 8 months of the year. Besides their on-the-job training, they do that on the weekends. And then we have some intensive training down in Astoria, Oregon, 10 days, a 10-day period each year. Other regions don't necessarily do that. They might rely on just the bookwork and on-the-job training. So sometimes you're not getting, we like to think we have one of the best apprenticeships in the country. There's some other, Cal, Nevada has got a great apprenticeship too. Mountain States is doing pretty good. And then the East Coast, other areas kind of lack. You see that when people travel in the training. As far as other avenues, really the apprenticeship's the only path. There are some private blind schools now. It's kind of turned into a mini, like a unit. It's kind of the way college has gone, where you have organizations that make a bunch of money sending somebody through a school that's 4 months long, that kind of gives them the basics. And then some individuals think that makes them a journeyman lineman, and some don't. And there are definitely challenges I see a lot more fatalities and injuries where other companies, or I don't want to bash on the unorganized, but they put people in places they shouldn't be. For instance, we have 7 steps every 6 months. If you have 1,000 hours of on-the-job training and your grades are 80% or better in your classroom, your workbooks that you do, you get 80% or better, they're done on time, and we have evaluations every month by the foreman and the journeyman lineman that's on the crew, at least one of them that's overseeing their training. They track all their hours. They do a report on. They have to return that in every month. If it's late, the second one time it's late, the hours don't count. Very rigorous. You're indentured as an apprentice. You go where they tell you to go. It's a indentured apprenticeship. If they say go to Spokane next week and go work for contractor XYZ, you go to Spokane and work next week. And then a month later, they might say, go down to Portland, Oregon, work for this contractor, because they have the type of work that you need to learn, whatever it is. But we do that process, and they move through those 7 steps in progression. And so at 5th step, and they're making some changes with the apprenticeship. If an apprentice is excelling, they're moving that to halfway through their 4th step. They go hot, work on energized. You can work on 600 volts or less as we call a cold apprentice, but at that midway point, you then can work on the 7,000 volt, 13,000, 12,000, all up to 500,000. You can work on that energized conductors, high voltage conductors. So we see in other places they put people, kid just got out of line school, and 3 months later, hey, go up there in the air and work on that energized equipment. And that's where it goes real bad, real fast. So it's really funneling, having the work, because like I said, there's these organizations that are putting tons of kids, taking their money, putting them through the school. So we don't have a shortage of applicants to get into the apprenticeships. It's just the bottleneck is the actual work to train them, because we have our ratio of 1-to-1, 1 journeyman to 1 apprentice.
And just again, it sounds like the apprenticeship is definitely a way to go. But could a utility have an apprenticeship program within what they're doing?
Yes, many of the utilities have their apprenticeships, because we're certified with the state of Washington. We have our certified apprenticeship, like Clint said. Richland and Vista, especially the larger utilities, have their own apprenticeship. PSC has all contractors, so they're utilizing construction members to do all of their work. But your Snohomish County PUDs, Seattle City Lights, they all have state certified apprenticeships.
Got it. So there's a whole bunch of, so it's not just the 370 you guys got, there's a whole series of these streams of apprentices coming through.
Yeah. And just so you know, Local 77 represents not only construction, but almost all the utilities in the state, except for the Yakima Nation and up in Bonners Ferry, North Idaho. There's some pockets. There's Local 483 in Tacoma, just the city of Tacoma, and they have construction as well that we have a contract. We're with them together for our apprenticeship, but and there's a few on the coast, but basically every utility is IBEW and the ones that want to and see a benefit in training their own, they have their own apprenticeship, state certified apprenticeships, which are a mirror of what we do.
Great. Thank you, Will. We have one more question, comment, and then I'm going to switch gears. Nicholas, go ahead.
Thank you. And Will, this has been extraordinarily informative. I think we all really appreciate you coming on and educating us about linemen and how you become a lineman and that sort of thing. But I am curious, previously I worked at a utility, and my recollection, it's been a while, but my recollection is that one of the challenges that the utility had, it was a rather large utility in the Pacific Northwest, that they didn't have enough journeymen. The journeymen were so busy that they had struggled to oversee the apprentices. and because they just didn't have the time, they had to focus on all the work that was in front of them. Is that a problem that you see, or is my recollection incorrect, or that sort of thing?
Yeah, there's apprentice ratio. It's 1-to-1 now. It used to be 2-to-1, 2 apprentices to 1 journeyman lineman, and that changed because they knew they're going to run out of linemen. But they kind of was under like pulling teeth, because they know that you know, if you're whatever your trade is, and if you're doing the work and training the next guy at the same time, the demand on you is a lot. And imagine doing a dangerous job and trying to train 2 apprentices, because you're trying to, it's like herding cats sometimes, or everybody that has children, if you have one child, and like I do, you got what you got, you think you got it rough, and then you got 2 or 3 to watch at the same time while you're trying to cook dinner or do whatever. Make sure the kid doesn't put their hand on the stove. You're watching a lot more hands the more you have. So there is, it depends utilities. It might be, the growing pains too, of how many journeymen you have. If you can't get any more as work, try to, as you get more work. But we don't see any way around it besides, just maximizing as many apprentices as you can have on the crews legally and safely to the work you have. There's one question you had earlier popped in my head about the inside wiremen. They're going to have their own challenges because electric cars and off natural gas is going to be a higher, that's going to be a higher demand themselves. So the meter bases might not have enough capacity. 200 amp meter base, very older houses might be 100 amp meter base, and houses today's standard is 200 amp meter base. You might have to go to the next class up, a 400 amp meter base, if you have an electric car and you're running your heat and you're running everything at one time. So we'll see how that challenge comes, but they'll definitely have their own, and retrofitting houses to wire up for electric chargers and stuff. You don't want anybody just grab a little bit of Romex and wire up their little home deal to plug in their car and burn their house down. So they're going to have their own work cut out for them coming up.
Great. Will, thank you so much. Appreciate it very, very much. And so my challenge to folks that are on the call on the TCWG, as we start going through the principles, in light of the conversation that we had just now, is there anything that we need to add to the principles? Is there anything that we want to add, either enhance or change for the principles as they're written, or add a new one, so that we accommodate the learning that we just did over the course of the last 40 minutes. So thank you, Will. Kathleen, anything else before we move on?
No, I do think that I haven't looked all the way through, but I do think we need to add something. So I don't know the right language about, supporting the necessary education for the workforce. I don't have the right words, but recognizing that as the need for electric power grows, the need for the workforce grows, and making sure that we have the appropriate education apprenticeship for a safe workforce.
It's things that like coming to mind. I was going to say, the limitations that pushes your projects out 10 years to start. That's one of the barriers, and it's not every project, but getting some projects in the pipeline to go. But also a thing that when you're just talking is as we start more and more apprentices, it's subsidized. Apprentices pay 40 cents an hour for their books and such, and then the contractors and the union members themselves, actually portion of their dues goes to the apprenticeship training. But if there was some, as we ramp up, there's more cost to that. If there was state or federal funds added to, maybe I'm sure there probably is some already, but we're a nonprofit where some funds could be added to help support building out more training facilities or equipment to, as we grow the apprenticeships